Hey everyone, welcome to my channel In the Gallery with Laura Ali. I am your host, Laura Ali. And today we're going to have our first stream and we are going to talk about one of my most favorite true crime cases, which is Nancy Brophy. We are going to review her cross-examination, and I think the attorney that cross-examined her did a stellar job. So we're going to get into it and just review the funny moments, the Nancy Brophy moments, and those moments that are just really sad as well, because it's like she really thought that Nancy really thought that Dan was just like a pawn in her world. And for those that are not familiar with this case, Nancy Brophy, I would say she's in her 60s, mid to late 60s. She might be early 60s, but grandmother type, old white hair. You're just like, oh, sweet old lady. Potentially, she might tell you about yourself, but she seems like a sweet old lady for the most part, I would say. And she kills her husband. She's convicted now, so yeah, she killed her husband, and she she basically tried to make it seem like, well, what her defense's theory was that a homeless person like broke in and killed Dan in the Culinary Institute, and obviously that didn't happen. But it was her retirement plan. She was just kind of done with him. She wanted to, in my opinion, move on with her life, and I think that's the case the defense build, is that she just wanted to live her life, and however she got to do that was whatever it was, and whoever came in her way was just a loose end. And I think Dan Brophy was that loose end that she wanted to just kind of get rid of. So we're going to get into it. It's about 45 minutes, and I'm going to stop and pause and give commentary and all that great stuff. But this is one of my most favorite cross examinations to watch. So this is the first half of it, and then I'll do another segment on the second half of it, which is much longer, but this is a great way to get started. So let's get into it. Okay. So I'm starting this stream, or just, I'm starting the recording at where her defense attorney asks, did you kill Dan Brophy? So the defense attorney probably is just about to say, like, did you kill Dan Brophy? And she's going to say, no, I did not. Like, every time she's asked whether or not she killed Dan Brophy, so when the prosecution asks, she'll do the same, no, I did not. It's like this eye closed thing that she's about. So, all right, here we go.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
All right, we just missed it.
Cross-examination.
Let me just play that just a little bit
It
so you
never
can see.
changed. Did you kill Dan Brophy? No, I did not. I have no further questions. Thank you.
All right, cross-examination.
Yes, thank you, Judge. Good afternoon, Ms. Brophy.
Good
I
afternoon.
love the prosecution. He really gets into it. Like, he is
Back in
no nonsense.
2018, did you carry a purse?
No,
Carry a wallet?
no.
How did you carry your critical pieces of information, like an ID and stuff like that?
In my bra.
Of course.
I know that's weird, but so much of what I did was not aided by having a purse. So I had my phone in my bra. If I needed a driver's license or a card, and I rarely had cash. So in my bra.
And I want to say, I feel like Nancy Brophy is just being somewhat provocative in this moment. Like, she knows that it's like, oh yeah, I just carry my stuff in my bra. Like, don't ask me any more questions about that. It's like, no, I'm going to ask you, were you wearing a bra that day? But okay, let's get into it. I don't want to get ahead of myself.
And you wrote this letter to Dan in 2015.
I did.
That's been referred to a couple of times. After you wrote that, did you print it?
Yes.
And what did you do with it?
I put it in an envelope, and it was a purple folder, and I put it on a desk that we shared. So if something happened and he came back and had to go through the desk, he would see it first thing.
And that was the only thing in that envelope?
Yes? Oh, no, there was probably copies of the policies in the envelope in addition, you know. I not only did I give him the information, I gave him the policies themselves.
And how would Dan know to have looked for that letter after, if you were to pass during that time?
I figured sooner or later he would go to our desk.
So I just want to pause for just a second, and I'm going to pause a lot. So, uh, but I just think it's so funny how, if you catch, she said envelope, and in like just a few seconds, the defense attorney, or excuse me, the prosecution attorney is going to say envelope, and she's like, it's not an envelope, it's a folder, like, because she uses envelope and folder interchangeably in this moment, and then he does the same thing, and she really jumps on him. I think that's really funny.
That's what I figured, that sooner or later he would be looking for something and there would be the photo with Dan on it, and he would see it and read it and
And she said folder just
realize
now.
what he had.
Okay. So you put this letter and some policies, perhaps, and put them in this envelope, put it on the desk. And,
Folder.
I'm sorry, what did I
Purple,
say?
you said envelope. It's a purple folder.
Okay.
But she said envelope,
Purple folder.
and she loves
And
that
did
he
you write his
trips up
name
on
on it?
purple.
Yes,
Okay.
in big letters.
Did you say something about a picture? Did you not say that?
I don't think so,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So it says Dan on it.
right?
Okay. And is this a folder that closes, or like, is there a snap on it or anything like that?
Can you hold up that orange folder?
And her
Thank
directing
you.
her
It's a folder just like
defense
this. It's a
attorney
folder.
around. Like, who
And
does
it's
she think she
purple.
is?
Gotcha.
Thank you.
And so when you got back from your surgery,
Right.
was that folder still there,
It was.
right where you left it?
Yes.
Was there any indication to you that Dan had ever read that letter?
No. As far as I can tell, Dan never read it.
In that letter, you direct Dan to keep paying on the Americo policy because he'll get the premiums back in 9 years.
Yes, my math skills were a little iffy there.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Is your math wrong, or did you just have a typo?
She
Or what?
knows.
I'm going to tell you my math was either wrong or I had a typo. I had no idea, but it is wrong. You're absolutely right.
Because it's actually 19 years, right?
No. And by that time, it was probably more like 15 years.
So probably not a typo then, because the 9 is. But he had about 15 more years that he needed to pay on.
I did.
Okay. And you knew that. You knew that about the policy.
I did.
And you also knew that if you were to get to that point where you were collecting, or I'm sorry, had the ability to collect the
Right.
premiums back, you knew then that if you were to take that money back, that you'd actually have to give up the policy.
Nope.
You didn't know that?
No. I could continue paying on the policy for Dan, but I could take the money out of it.
So this part is funny because it's like she doesn't want the prosecution to be right, but then she's gonna get all like stumbled on this insurance policy, uh, the payout on the insurance policy. And I think this is really funny because then she starts looking at her attorney and she's like really stressed out by this.
Didn't your insurance expert testify? Did you hear him testify and say that if you were to take that money out of that policy, that you would have had to forfeit the policy?
If they said that, I didn't understand, but I can tell you this. They have a schedule in the policy that shows what happens if you have this money. For example, if Dan died when he was 78, we didn't get 100,000 back, we got 167,000 back. But if we took the 67,000 out of it, we could continue paying for the policy. Now, that's not to say it was a 20-year term. That's not to say they might not raise the premium on it, but we could continue paying for it.
You disagree with your insurance expert?
I disagree with that aspect if that's what they really said.
Okay. And this, you said, was part of a bigger retirement.
which is her own witness, is the insurance expert who stated this. But
Plan, correct?
It was?
Correct. And so, this idea that, I mean, would you agree it's pretty risky?
What is risky?
Well, the one, you have to
what
live
is risky?
to be able to collect on the policy, right?
Well, yeah.
Okay. And if you don't want
This
to
is
give
when
up that
it's
well, I guess
this is when it starts. She starts looking at her attorney like, yeah.
you disagree with that notion that you have to give up the policy. So I guess I'll just ask you this. You agree that you paid 3 to 6 times
Yes,
more for that policy than what you could have bought a similar coverage for?
I do.
And so,
Purposefully.
in just asking, did you guys have the thought that, well, maybe we should put this money away and actually be able to access it whenever we need it, instead of risking not getting it at all? Did you have that discussion?
Okay, I need to break that down and answer your
Yeah,
question in
let me ask you in a
segments.
series of questions.
Okay.
Did you have the discussion with Dan that, well, maybe we don't want to spend all this money?
And I will say, so this attorney, I love this attorney, but on this day, he's like in warm up mode. Like he's warming up, he's getting his question flow down, he's like feeling her out, like, so he's had his questions prepared and he had everything, he had the goal in mind. But today, he's a little clunkier than I feel like he is tomorrow. This is the afternoon session. They're almost done for the day. She's already been on the stand for a while, so she's warmed up on the stand. He's just beginning his questioning. He's just beginning to build his, well, to rebut. So yeah, so I think that's interesting, but he gets a lot stronger along the way. So
Policy right now. Let's pay for a cheaper policy, but let's put some money away, like as if we were putting it in to the life insurance.
That we would have had that discussion if either one of us were savers.
Yeah.
But at that point, I knew I was not a saver. So I understand this about myself. Part of the reason why I have forced savings policies is because I know I'm not a saver. And if I can put this money away where I can't get to it, we will have it later on when we need it. If we're just doing a savings account or we're investing in the stock market,
Sure.
I'm not good like that.
But you agree that you treated the forester's policy that also had this savings component. It's forced savings, but you were just taking the money.
I
Is that
took
right?
the money out when we needed it because it was there, because why we had it was for A, retirement, but B, emergencies, and this qualified as an emergency.
Not much of a forced savings, though, if you're just taking the money out, right?
That is true.
And in
But
fact, you didn't pay that back either.
no, we did not. But part of our plan was to pay that back. When we sold the house, we were going to overfund the policy.
Sure. And in that Dearest Dan letter, you also told Dan, or you were writing at least, that he should try to collect on a Conseco policy, even though you knew that it wasn't really enforced, correct?
No, it had been, let me go back and explain that a little differently. It had been Universal Life. Conseco had an iffy reputation at that point. We had decided to let that go. But when you have Universal Life that you can't borrow against, it continues on.
I feel like when she goes into her deep explanations, it's because she really is trying to like cover her tracks and she really starts to get animated and like really get into her explanations. And I feel like that's just another part of Nancy Brophy's tactics to be as sneaky as she is, and I don't believe it. So I don't know much about insurance policies, actually nothing at all, but I just feel like something doesn't seem right.
Because the money you have in there continues to pay the policy. So I knew it was being paid, even though I had stopped paying on it. I knew there was a real good possibility it was in force.
I see. You just weren't really sure.
Right.
Okay. And
So
when you 4 days after Dan's murder, you called Detective Posey, is that right?
No. Dan died Saturday morning. I called Monday afternoon.
That's when you
Okay.
called Detective Posey.
Oh my goodness. This part is the funniest to me. So the prosecution is like, okay, you called the detectives 4 days after Dan Brophy's murder. She corrects them to say, no, I called 2 days after. It's like, why are you making yourself look more guilty? It's just because I feel like Nancy has this desire to always be right. I don't care. Like, whatever you say, if you say the sky is blue, I'm going to tell you it's orange because guess what? I know more than you. And she has a condescending attitude, I feel like, when she says this, but
Regarding the insurance policy.
Right.
And that
I,
was,
I had done what they had told me. I'd called my insurance companies and started the claim, and that's when we had a conversation. And then I called Holly, and then I called Detective Posey.
we'll break that
I'm
down. I just want to,
sorry.
you're saying that was on the 4th.
I think so. I think it was that Monday.
And if your call records show that it was actually the 6th?
It could have been.
Okay.
You know, the call records are going to be more accurate at this point than I am.
And also on the 6th, you actually, well, during that phone call with Detective Posey, you only disclosed a $40,000 policy.
Yes, but he
Remember
didn't
that?
ask me about anything else.
I understand. I don't think he even asked you about that. Isn't it true that you actually just offered that it was
That's
just a
true.
$40,000 policy?
Mm-hmm.
The small,
yeah, how would he know to ask you about an insurance policy he doesn't know you have? Like, and he didn't ask you about the first one, so why are you volunteering it? So the whole story behind this is, and they're going to get into it, but I just think it's so funny. She calls the detectives to say, can you give me a letter of exoneration so I can show it to the insurance companies? It's like, what? I didn't even know this was a thing. I didn't even look into it, but I feel like a letter of exoneration makes sense if you've maybe been accused of something, drawn through the ringer. We're talking let's call it 2 to 4 days after Dan's murder. No one's been accusing her of the murder. No one's accused her of the murder yet. So it's like, I don't know if you need a letter of exoneration. The only time I could see it is if you were maybe even convicted of a crime that you did not commit and they exonerate you. That would make sense. But even being drawn through the ringer, it's like if you haven't been convicted in anything, you can't, there's nothing to be exonerated. I guess. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a law professional, guys, but I just thought that was really funny.
of all of your policies,
No, it wasn't the smallest, but it was a small policy.
besides the Life Map $2,500
Right,
policy.
but it was the smallest.
The only one you
That one.
offered to Detective Posey was the smallest policy.
Yes.
During the same conversation that you're asking for a letter of exoneration.
I'm asking to see if that's something that he would have said, oh, sure, we'll do that for you. Or if he said no. I mean, I was prepared for the
No.
worst. I was prepared for him to say no.
Sure. Isn't it true that you actually talked to all your insurance policy
I
companies
did.
that day?
I did. And not a one of them asked for that, but Forrester's.
Okay, so you called all.
And she makes it seem like it's Forrester's fault that they asked her. Like, if no one asked me, no one else asked me besides Forrester's. It's like, yeah. And guess what? They really helped with solving this and they didn't have to pay you out because guess what? You did it. So I'm glad they did ask you because you're an idiot. And who does that?
Your life insurance companies
Mm-hmm.
notified them of Dan's death.
Yes.
One of them asked you for a letter of exoneration.
Mm-hmm.
You asked Detective Posey for that.
I asked if it was possible to get that.
So, when did Susan Estrada get into town?
Susan got in, Dan, okay, let me think for a minute here. Susan got in on that Friday, the following Friday. So Dan died on Saturday the 2nd, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. She would have gotten into town on the 8th of June.
So you would agree that she was not with you when you made that call to Detective Posey?
I would. And I don't think I think I told her about it and her memory was just off on it.
Sure. She
I
was
don't
not
think-
sitting next to you while you made that call?
No. I would think that, uh, I would think that after 4 years, her memory was just fuzzy.
Oh, I'm sorry. Were you telling us why she forgot or something?
I would, telling you what I thought happened. I thought her memory was fuzzy on what happened.
Um, Based on your work history and Dan's work history,
Right.
would you expect Dan's Social Security income to be higher than yours?
Oh, we already knew it was. Social Security sends you a statement.
Of course it was, Nancy, because Dan actually worked, and Nancy, on the other hand, just picked up odd jobs. She opened her business. She did whatever she wanted to do. While Dan actually had to hold down, uh, I'm not going to say 9 to 5, but I'll say consistent employment, consistent W-2 employment. And Nancy, she did not do that. So 1,000%, his Social Security would be way higher than hers.
I think every quarter, and they tell you if you work till this age, it'll be this much. If you work till this age, it'll be this much. We knew his was a lot higher.
And when Dan could have started collecting that at 65?
He could have started collecting at 62,
Right.
but we decided not to do it
Until when?
until he was 70 when we got the maximum benefit out of it.
I see. But you chose to draw yours sooner.
I did.
You started drawing yours at 65?
I know. I started drawing mine at either 66 or 67. I'm not sure which one we decided on. It might have been 66. No, I think it was 67 that I started drawing it.
If Dan had started drawing at the time that he died, what would he have been able to collect?
So I just realized, so yeah, she has to be late 60s, early 70s. Looking good, Nancy.
I don't know.
But it was more than yours.
It was a lot more than mine. You know, he was employed and I was self-employed. And if I declared a loss in my company one year, and believe me, in 2002, 2003, after 911, I had losses. And if I declared a loss, then Social Security was also part of that, and you didn't have to pay. So my Social Security was a lot less than his was.
And
Yeah,
isn't
I'm
it
sure she
true that if
declared a lot of
Dan's,
losses.
after he died, you could actually collect his Social Security instead of your own?
I'm not sure exactly how that works. I know that's the theory, but I think he had to have claimed it first before I could have claimed it for me. You know what I'm saying? If he hasn't claimed it,
Yeah,
then I can't come in and claim it. But I
we know what you're saying, Nancy. We know.
could be wrong on that. You know, Social Security is like Medicare. It's 8 million rules that are secretly hidden in a mayonnaise jar somewhere.
You hadn't done any research on that, even though you guys were approaching or looking at retirement planning?
Yeah, but we weren't looking at retirement planning where Dan was dead.
Right.
You know, that wasn't part of the plan. You know, the plan
Was
was he
it?
was going to take Social Security at 70.
And when were you actually planning on selling the house? When were you, before Dan died, what was the plan for when the house was going to go on the market?
It was okay. I was
So,
aiming for September. He said, I want to garden one more year around the edges while they finish it up. So he was aiming for later in the fall.
Okay, so you guys agreed that fall.
okay, so this is when it gets interesting because they're gonna get into the topic of selling the house. Now, although I believe Nancy wanted to sell the house and move, I don't think Dan wanted to. And even if Dan wanted to, they were making zero, zero effort in actually cleaning up the house and getting it ready to sell. They were both somewhat hoarders, if you want to call it, or collectors, or, they were older people that gathered a lot of stuff and didn't move it for years and years and years and years. We all know those people in our neighborhood. My mom's one of them. So I think I think this was part of her retirement plan. Kill Dan, you get the money, you get the house to get it ready to sell and get the money from that and move and live the sexy Navy SEAL life. That's what her books were pretty much were about, like these shirtless Navy SEALs. That was her thing. So I think them talking about the house, like the prosecution really gets the pain points here. The pain points were money, were the house. She wanted to live her years and just do whatever she wanted to do, not even realizing how much the reason why she's even been as comfortable as she has been. Yeah, she had her business, but she also had Dan. Without Dan, she's nothing. She's nothing. And granted, she had her business, but Dan was a huge part of this.
All of 2018.
Yes. But later in the fall probably meant October, not December.
Sure. What does downsizing mean to you?
Well, we had a 4-bedroom house and there were 2 of us. We didn't need that much space. We had a 4-bedroom house with a full basement. And, yes, I think Dan needed some sort of space for his stuff, but we didn't need that we needed a good kitchen and, real frankly, a couple of bedrooms. And I like a nice bath, but other than that, I'm really pretty flexible.
And you had started to look at some properties?
No, we had started to locate properties. We hadn't looked at them. We just said, look, I found some things in this area.
What kind of price range were you looking in?
Well, what we wanted to do is be able to pay it completely off. And we thought we would have about $400,000 to do that with. So we were probably looking in the 350 price range,
Yeah.
somewhere like that.
And you're saying out in the kind of halfway to the coast?
Well,
Again, she says they would have had $400,000. Nancy and her math, I don't know how she does her calculations. Because at the end of the day, and they're going to mention this, she probably would have had, well, she walked away with around 250 when she did sell the house. So it wouldn't have been that much money. My point is, she continues to live above her means. That is Nancy Brophy. Just how can I live above my means? What's the best way I can live above my means? And she'll find it. She will find it, because the fact that she even said that they were looking in houses in the 350 range, knowing that would be something they would have to take out a mortgage on because they don't have the money for it, because they still owe money on their house, their present house. So it's not like they would have just walked away, scot free, cash in hand, let's go buy something. No, they had debt. They had credit card debt. They had the mortgage still they had to pay off. They were not lush with cash. So a $400,000 house was not practical at all. But here we go back to Nancy's fantasy land.
Dan liked Delilah's property, and it is east of Banks. It is west of Banks. It's toward the coast. I like Vernonia. Vernonia is this charming, charming little town. It has a lake. It has this downtown that on the light posts they have these metal cutouts of bears messing with honey. It has flat land. It has no trees. I liked Vernonia. Now, Vernonia was a little further on and I'm going to say, the northwest, but it still would have been a straight shot down 26 pretty much.
She loves Vernonia. When she talks about Vernonia, you can see she gets very passionate about Vernonia. I don't think Dan really liked the idea of Vernonia. It was further away. And I think maybe about 30 or 40 minutes possibly away. It wasn't as convenient, is my point. And Dan didn't want to do that. He wanted to stay around where he had a community. He was part of a community. And they're going to get into that as well. But Nancy wasn't part of that community. She was by association only through Dan. But if it wasn't for Dan, no one would have batted a second eye at Nancy. Because she just wasn't, those people where it's just something about them. You're just like, I don't know if I really want to hang around with you that much. She was that person. So she really loves Vernonia, and I think that was another point of contention. Dan doesn't want to move where I want to move. I'm tired of doing what Dan wants to do. Da, 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 da.
How many times did you visit Vernonia?
Oh, I was in Vernonia all the time. I had clients there. I liked the town. When we started talking about there, I'd gone down there 2 or 3 times and looked around at the.
and I'm not a body language expert, but this body language and like the way she shifts to like, well, I like Vernonia, that is telling to me. I'm not an expert, but I know body language. You're closing yourself off. You want to try to protect yourself, and I feel like this is a very sensitive topic. This could have been a huge part of the catalyst as to why she decided to kill Dan. She wanted a change, and whatever that looked like, it did not include Dan.
Houses and the neighborhoods and what we could get. So yeah, I was in Vernonia a fair amount.
When you were going to sell your house, would you agree that you had about a little under $250,000 owed on your mortgage?
I would think that's right.
And you did sell your house later that year, is that correct?
No, I sold it the next year. I sold it in 2019.
Oh, when in 2019?
I'm going to say February, March, somewhere in there, maybe as late as April.
And it sold for about 565,000.
Yes.
So after,
I always think, who buys these houses? You know? Like, oh God, could you imagine? Like, he wasn't killed there, but just the energy. I don't know if I would ever want to buy a house of a former murderer, but it's like, you can't control everything. Eventually, you're going to end up crossing paths with someone that had a seedy past. But yeah, I wonder who owns the house now. I hope everything's going well with them.
fees and realtor fees and all that, would you agree that you probably would make a little less than 250,000?
I didn't see the settlement statements on that, so I really don't know.
Okay. But that wouldn't, okay, well, we'll move on then.
He's still warming up. Give him some time. He's still warming up.
Now, you said part of the reason of selling the house was basically you don't necessarily want stairs anymore.
Yes.
But at the time that Dan died and the time you guys were deciding to sell the house, you two were both relatively healthy still.
Yes.
You could still do the stairs just fine.
I was struggling with arthritis in my knee, but yeah,
Okay, but you didn't, you still had your bedroom upstairs.
we did.
You didn't move down to the main floor to deal
No.
with that. I was a little confused about the discussion of the tiny houses.
Oh,
So whose idea was that?
it was Dan's.
Here we go with Nancy's cackling. Oh my God. The way she starts to cackle, talking about the stories with the tiny house. So Dan wanted a tiny house. She thought that was the funniest thing in the world. It's just very odd to me. So she's gonna start cackling.
Dan, who needs more room than anybody I know, said, "Oh, we could live in a tiny house." No, we couldn't. Uh, but his fantasy life, like mine, is going to be an
Okay.
expat. Dan's was we could live in these little tiny houses, and that would work fine for us. And I thought, you know, smaller than our kitchen now, which Dan was spilling out of. No, we couldn't live like that. And the other thing is you have to be in really good health to live in a tiny house because most of the bedrooms are loft like bedrooms and you have to climb up this ladder, uh, night and day to get up there. Plus, I mean, real frankly, once you hit that 40 age group, you and I both know that we're up more in the middle of the night than we've ever wanted to be.
And I just want to say, Nancy obviously didn't want to divorce Dan because she knew if she divorced Dan, she would walk away with practically nothing. And if anything, they would have to split all assets and then still nothing, especially after all the debt. So I feel like she just, with her working in the life insurance business and the Medicare business and doing this and doing that, she just felt like the best solution was for her to walk away with the money. And oh, who cares about little old Dan? Who cares about his fantasies? Who cares about his desire to live in a tiny house? Who cares? Who cares? Dan doesn't matter. That's how she acts. It's like he doesn't matter. His thoughts, opinions, feelings, they don't matter.
And I don't want to go up and down the stairs or the ladder 18 times in the middle of the night.
So was he joking or?
No, he was serious, but it was a fantasy. It was like
Oh,
lots of things. It was like my wanting to go to Portugal. This would be a fabulous idea. And so, we sing and dance to the other one, and the other one pokes a hole in that balloon, and says, that's not going to work for us.
yeah.
So
You really did poke a hole in that balloon, didn't you, Nancy?
his ideal situation was that he would have his own tiny house and you would have your own.
No, he would, he would have a house for junk, and then he would live in mine where it would be tidy.
Junk. Now, watch how she continues to call his stuff junk. Like, the level of disdain that she had for Dan is clear and evident. It's so clear and evident. She does such a poor job at hiding her disdain for him even after he's dead. Okay? If your partner, maybe he was a hoarder, maybe he wasn't, but if your partner accumulated stuff and you knew that stuff was valuable to them and you knew that they used that stuff for different cooking projects or different things Dan was into. He was an eclectic dude. He was into his stuff. And the fact that you just call it junk, you're completely devaluing what it means to that person. And I'm not saying it's okay to hoard because I deal with that in my family, but you don't have to be as cold and callous. And knowing that he's passed away and you're still calling it junk, she never respected him.
So the plan was to subdivide this property.
Yes.
You and Dan discussed, was it to, you I wasn't quite clear on this. You weren't going to divide it into 3 lots like your neighbor, correct?
We didn't think we could. We thought we needed 2 lots to make it work.
Why did you conclude that you couldn't do that?
Well, we could have done that, but here's the thing. In order to bring the driveway all the way through, sitting right in the middle, that's a garage. So we have to tear this garage down, which isn't a great loss, except the house in front now no longer has a garage. So now we have to figure out what to do. But if we'd brought it all the way down and only divided it in half, we could have put a garage back here with the driveway that turned into it.
Okay. So ultimately that was the plan.
Ultimately, but it was one of many plans, I would say.
Okay. And you reached out to Richard Frymark to sort of start that process. And
No, I reached out not to start the process, but to consult with Richard, who I've always thought had great ideas. And Richard then told me how to start.
sure, I guess that's what I meant. I apologize.
Okay.
To consult. And then he gave you some names of some people to contact.
He did.
And did they provide you some information on how to?
They did, but we never set up an appointment. We talked about it.
Right. And so they never moved forward with the yard cleanup because they didn't have the money to do it. And she knew that. And I think she just was trying to hold out so she can go through with her master plan.
And they said, when you get closer, you get the backyard cleaned up, give us a call, and now we'll look seriously at it.
And who did you talk to out of the people that he told you to call?
K and something engineering. I have it written down somewhere.
Okay.
But I called whoever he recommended, and he'd even given me a name of a guy.
You heard him testify and rattle off a few names of people that he told you to call.
Yeah.
And one of those people is one of the people you called?
Yes.
Do you remember that? Okay. And what kind of information did he give you?
To clean up the property, and then we'd look at it. Okay. There was nothing they could do with the condition it was in at that point.
I could be wrong, but is that K&S Engineering? Is that right, or something like that?
Or was it K and N? It was K and somebody.
Okay.
I'm
not going to hold you to it. It's just ringing in the top of my head. So, but K and something engineering. Nonetheless, one of the names.
Yard cleanup.
Okay.
I don't think she's
Nick
cold.
White? Does that sound familiar? Or is it one of the other names?
It could have been. I don't know. I mean, at this point, I'm guessing.
Okay. Well, let's not do that. I'm just seeing if you remember.
So she's going to get into a real good cackle in a minute. And it's about who did the cleanup of the yard. And she thinks it's the funniest thing. Ha, 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 ha. I could have handed out awards to everyone. Little ribbons. I'll give you a ribbon. I'll give you a ribbon. It's just like no one wants your condescending ribbons, Nancy.
Did you talk to anybody else out of that group of people that he had given you
No, because once they said clean up the yard, that was where we focused our energy.
Okay. And when was that again?
Once again, I'm guessing. I would have to go back and look at the date, but we talked to Richard about this in at least 2017, but it could even have been as early as 2016.
Okay. And it was after that conversation with him that you decided to go and make sure that you were on the deed?
No, Richard pulled up our information and he said, Nancy, you're not on the deed. There was no
Right.
making sure. He said, you need to do this. And he sent me paperwork to do it.
Yeah, and maybe my question was bad. It was after that that you went to correct that?
Right,
Okay, based on the information you were getting from Mr. Fremont.
right.
You said that Dan had fallen in love with Delilah,
Lala?
Delilah Marvell's property.
Uh-huh.
But hadn't he only been out there one time?
Yes, but he walked the property.
I also feel like the prosecution at this point is playing dumb. Part of me, just based on how I know he performs tomorrow, I he might be warming up, but also I feel like he is purposefully stumbling over his words to make him feel, I mean, to make Nancy Brophy feel superior to him. So when he starts with her tomorrow, she's already like, this guy's an idiot. I can talk circles around him, and he corners her and gets her so good. But
80 acres. He and Delilah were friends. Delilah had been his student. Delilah had come back and do mushroom hunting, but he realized it was a type of property that he could have made work. So maybe it wasn't that he was in love with her property per se, as it was the type of property and the location that he could have made work.
And you said you weren't looking at homes yet, but had you contacted a realtor to talk about options yet?
No,
Okay. What about to put your house on the market?
no. I mean, I talked to the realtor who lives down the block, and he gave me some advice. But once again, the advice was clean up the backyard.
And that realtor was Paul Johnston?
Yes,
And he's a realtor neighbor of yours?
yes.
And did you and Dan and him talk about that?
I would say if he and Dan talked, Paul had been a chef, and Paul is also a serious gardener. In fact, his entire front yard is a garden, and I knew Dan secretly envied that, but I was holding on to the front yard. But no, what they would have talked about, I'm betting, rather than what the property's worth, is how did you grow this? How did you make that?
Sure.
Dan made a Worcestershire sauce. It was really, really good. He made a Tabasco sauce that that Paul made one that was similar. And so, it was that kind of exchange of information,
You saw them having those types of conversations?
Yeah, I mean, Paul's out all the time and they're walking the dogs and, we're walking the dogs. Dan is. And yeah, and during that, I know we shared the habanero sauce with him, and I know we shared the Northwest sauce, the Worcestershire sauce.
Did Paul ever come over to the house and actually look at the yard?
Not until after Dan died.
and this just reinforces to me that the whole plan was to kill Dan. No real work was ever started on the house, the yard. And when the attorney asked, the prosecution attorney asked, what steps did you take to start to ready the house to move out? And she says, well, I organized some drawers, some bathroom drawers, some linen drawers, or some, junk drawers. That's not really preparing to move out. That's the least of it. Like, that's something you're doing when you're packing and you're moving for real. You have a place to go to. That's something you do when you're just like organizing, when you're just cleaning up around the house. That's not really tackling the major issues, which is the accumulation of stuff they had. The little drawers aren't going to help much.
And I know you said that they had conversations, but mostly around probably food.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Gardening.
I'm sorry?
Gardening.
Oh, and gardening, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You never saw them, or you were never around when they talked about the property, selling the property?
No.
You, as part of your retirement plan, you said the 35,000 was meant to catch up on the mortgage because you guys had fallen behind,
Right.
and get the yard ready.
Right.
Why didn't you guys use that to pay down your high interest credit cards?
Because Dan was already doing that. If you recall when Ms. Crouch testified, she testified that he had already started on that plan.
Right.
With the Avamere money. The Avamere money was for that. This money was for the house.
I don't know a ton about death and credit cards, but I know some credit cards could probably go after family members, but some can't, or maybe none of them can. I don't know, but I also think that's suspicious. All of the debt was in Dan's name. So if Dan's dead, the debt is dead with Dan, which is just creepy. Oh my God.
Right. But I
And
mean,
trading one interest loan for another interest loan wasn't really working. You know, we needed
Mm-hmm.
to pay off the credit cards. That's absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
But we needed to get the house in shape.
what was the interest on the
Mm-hmm.
credit card?
I don't know.
It's about
Yes,
15%.
you do.
You know, I don't know because Dan paid them and he paid attention. And but I think one of them was higher than the other.
What was the interest on the 401k loan?
It wasn't very high at all. It was a really low interest. I was kind of
Yeah.
surprised by that, but I can't tell you exactly what it was.
So let's just hypothetically,
Okay.
if Dan's credit card was 15%,
It was probably 5 on the 401k
right?
loan.
So would you agree
Mm-hmm.
that it would make more sense to pay off a higher interest credit card and then just save that money or use that for something else?
But it goes back to she didn't want to use her bit of money to pay this, right? Like, because she wants to walk away with this money. So, no.
I would agree if, in fact, we hadn't already had a plan in place and working on it.
We heard a lot about the yard.
Mm,
A lot about the yard. We got a little conflicting information
okay.
about who actually cleaned it.
Yes.
The cackle.
I heard that myself.
What do you have to
The
say about? What do you have to say about
cackle.
uh, I James Denny did the heavy duty work. Trust me, he had the tractor, he did the heavy duty work. But Susan and her boyfriend did a lot. They called it something else, but I thought it was a ditch witch. And they pulled up a lot of the blackberries. So it was a combination effort that everybody's laying claim to, and I don't care. Fine. As long as it got done, I didn't need to, I could have handed out ribbons. You got this, you got that, but that was just sarcastic. Ignore that. What
What
I
was
would
it?
really say is everybody worked hard on it. Everybody deserved
Oh.
credit for it.
Oh. She
it?
doesn't.
Sounds like you had a lot of help.
I did.
Um, guessing, correct?
And you see her looking over at an attorney like, it's like, stop looking at your
If
attorney.
I'm wrong, that help was maybe available to you before Dan died as well.
No, not in the way you're talking about.
Which
So
way am I talking about?
Well,
the prosecution is basically saying, so part of it, so do you think you would have gotten as much help to clean out the backyard if Dan was still alive? And she says no. She agrees, no, I wouldn't have gotten as much help. Everyone came out to help because Dan was dead.
I mean, I cannot imagine having 35 friends drop by to help you pack when Dan's alive. I just can't even imagine they would think that was a fun idea. Now, I would tell you that before Dan died, I had friends who came over and helped me organize. Linda Smith is a librarian, and I can tell you that our books never looked better than when she came over and did them. Uh, I had other people who would help me with organizational things, but no, I don't see 35 people. I couldn't even imagine Dan thinking that would be a good idea. You know, having 35 people come through our house to help us pack.
Just to
No.
be clear, what you're saying right now is what you think that I was going to ask you.
Oh,
Mm,
yeah. So perhaps I've jumped the gun, and I believe my lawyers have
mm,
suggested to me I not do that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
what I thought you were asking was, did I have that same type of help available to me before Dan died? And I thought you were talking about the 35 people who helped me pack. Is that not what you were talking about?
I was just going to ask you if you called Jack Brophy to come help you with something, would he do it?
Oh, Jack Brophy was, uh, you have no idea how much help he was. If I had an issue with something, he would come and help me. Uh, Jack was great for us. You know, you couldn't have asked for a better father-in-law.
You had a lot to do.
And just pause on that really quick. How amazing is it that the father-in-law, I don't know what Jack Brophy looks like or what condition he was in, but if they're in their 60s, late 60s, and Jack Brophy's over there helping them do this and that, it's like, good for you, Jack. Like, that's like a good, like, uh, what, good Northwestern man.
Get ready to sell that house, right?
I did.
Besides the yard,
Mm-hmm.
what was it that you were doing to get ready to sell the house?
It was beyond the yard. It was also the basement.
Nothing,
It was also the
nothing.
garage. It was also the packing. It
Okay,
was
did you do
also
any of
getting
that?
down to the point that you could look to see what actually needed to be done on the house in terms of repairs to have the house ready.
So what of that
Okay,
were you doing to get ready to sell?
what have you done? Nothing.
And I'm talking about before Dan died.
Oh, before Dan died, uh, we were going through areas and cleaning up. For example, bathroom drawers. You know, the simple, stupid stuff that manages to grow like mushrooms in there. But we were working on it. We just weren't pushing it as hard as we would have been.
Even though you were planning on putting it on the market in a few months?
Yes?
Or you agree that the basement was full,
The
Looking over
basement was
at the
full.
the
attorney.
garage was full?
Yep,
The garage
keep
was full.
looking at our attorney.
Sounds like the rest of the house was full.
Not in the same way.
So what you had done up to the point of Dan's death to prepare to sell the house was have the yard worked on, and you cleaned out some bathroom drawers.
No. I mean, we talked seriously about, we probably had, real frankly, we probably had 1,000 books. We went through our books. We discussed what we needed to do about those. And in the end, we didn't do that at all. What we did was I donated them to the library. Uh, we, you know, we were working on things. We were going
What
through
things?
things that we regarded as
Stop looking
important
at
to
your
us, but
attorney.
not necessarily something somebody else wanted. We had a booth at one of the garage sale places, and we started hauling stuff over there and selling it through the garage sale places. And that's how we ended up getting the storage building to begin with, was through the garage sales place.
Stop looking at your attorney.
And after Dan died, your plans for moving, I know there's mention of a condo. I think your attorney asked you about the condo.
Mm-hmm.
But you're saying that wasn't an idea in your head until after Dan had died.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
And did you have any thoughts of moving to Arizona or Texas or Nevada, anything like that?
No, those places are hot. I don't know anybody in Arizona or Nevada. I know too many people in Texas.
Okay. You planned on staying in the area?
I do want to say I like that line, okay? Like, I want to use that line. Like, oh, I know too many people out there, but I don't know anybody out there. Like, I love that line.
Not necessarily, but I wouldn't have moved someplace south.
Where were you going to move?
I have friends in Colorado, and I might have considered that. I always liked living in Colorado.
Colorado's beautiful.
I think there's been a lot of testimony, and I'm assuming you'll agree, that Dan was a really beloved member of the community,
Yes, he was.
Yes, he
held in
was.
high regard.
Yes, he did.
Would you agree that his death was a devastating blow to the entire community?
I would.
Everybody loved Dan, right?
As far as I know,
Yep.
you know, I certainly did. But I would have people come up to me all the time and say, "You're Chef Brophy's wife? I love Chef Brophy." And I said, "Me too."
Right. You're
Me
talking about before.
too.
Before.
And then after, outpouring of love and support for this man.
Yes. And he deserved every bit of it.
Is it fair to say that there's numerous qualities that Dan had that you admired
Yes.
and that he admired about you?
Yes.
In some ways, we're even envious of the way that people looked up to him. And
Oh,
Yes.
no.
Yes.
Oh, no.
Yes.
I can remember a dinner that Karen and I and Dan went to. And
A
we all sat
lie,
down at the table. I
Nancy.
think it was
A
back when Hall
lie.
Street Grill was still in business. And appetizers came out. And we all looked at each other and said, we didn't order anything. And the person putting it down said, "No, the guys in the kitchen saw Chef Brophy come in and they wanted him to try this
Nixie trained
appetizer
all
plate."
of them.
It was nothing to go to dinner with Dan and have the chef come out of the kitchen and sit down and say, "We're thinking about changing our menus, and here's what we're thinking about doing. What do you think of that?" Uh, that was not envy.
Dan trained all of these chefs. They loved him to death. So when they saw him walk in, they're like, Chef Brophy, let me show you this, let me show you that, like, can I pick your brain for a minute? Let me get a little advice from you. He was so well respected and loved in the community, and she seethed at that, okay? Someone who thinks they're this romantic, erotic book writer and is seeking fame through that wants some type of acknowledgement and fame and praise for their work. And the fact that Dan was getting all of that praise and acknowledgement and love and attention made her sick. I know it did. You could just see the way she tells the story. I'll let her continue.
That was proud. I was delighted that people thought
Sure.
so highly of this man, and with reason. He was smart, and he he gave them his full attention and gave them his best possible answer.
She can't even think of good qualities to talk about. She's struggling to think of them.
Dan was never that was never
And it's not because he doesn't have them, it's just because she doesn't even see him in this way.
even a minor irritation for him.
do you think the way that people thought of Dan and treated him, that they then transfer that to you as well?
There was some of that,
No.
yes. I thought that I got some of that as well, and that uh, the fact that when I had a catering company and he talked to his class about my catering company, that my catering company gained a better reputation also as a result.
Is there anything that you did yourself in the community? Well, let me ask you this. Did you think that you were held in high regards in the community as well?
Yes, but not in the same way.
Did that make you jealous?
Oh no.
Oh,
Oh
yeah.
no.
Oh,
That made
yeah.
me proud that we were a couple who went together. Uh, there was no jealousy there. Uh, First off, Dan was so humble that being jealous would have been just completely out of the picture. I mean, this was a guy who wasn't gloating because people felt.
You could tell she was jealous, but she knew that there was no reason for her to be jealous because Dan was such an authentic guy and such a well meaning guy. And she knew, I think she personally knew that there was something going on with her and that she had this issue with Dan. And it's like, well, why do I feel this way? Like, he's so great. But she couldn't help herself. She continued to feel that way.
That way. This was a man who was quietly pleased. But no, I was
Quietly
never
pleased.
jealous that he was like that.
I assume he wasn't jealous of you either.
I'm, I can't imagine why he would be, you know. But no, he talked about me to his classes, and he had a.
And it's funny because, like, when she says she is an envious, she calls him this man. This man, this man. My husband, the love of my life, my everything. This man. I've never called my fiance this man or that man over there.
That I was management. Let me tell you a story, and I think this kind of sums it up.
Oh, wait, the story about her being management is funny. I'm sorry. I keep pausing it because this part is the most entertaining part of to me. Because she's talking about her being management. It's like he he really lived to serve her, not the other way around.
Dan was co-teaching with another instructor.
This
And the other
story.
instructor was whining because he said it's so hard to teach to cook with your wife because they don't understand mise en place, and so mise en place really is get your stuff together before you start cooking. That's a translation I'm sure the French would roll their eyes at. But they turned to Dan and they said, "Well, you don't have that problem because your wife is culinarily educated." And Dan said, "I don't have that problem for another reason." And they said, uh, "What is that reason?" And he said, "My wife doesn't cook." And so I think they spoke kind of slowly to him in case he wasn't catching on, and said, "Your wife owns a catering company. How can you say she doesn't cook?" And he said, "My wife hires people to cook. My wife can close the deal." And that was the first time that I thought he actually understands completely what it is that I
Oh
do.
my God.
And there was no jealousy there, there was pride.
She thinks this is a great story to share about how she never cooked for her husband in 25 years.
You know, and yeah, I never cooked a meal in 25 years. So
Real
24
loving.
years, 10
Hmm.
months, whatever.
Great.
At the end of the story.
Yes, it is. I'm sorry.
Are
What
you
did you
done?
normally order from Starbucks?
Are you done?
Oh, venti non-fat 2 equal latte. He ordered, uh, he ordered a chai tea latte. Uh, we had our drinks.
Did Dan know your order?
Oh, yeah.
He better. He better.
Did he often go to Starbucks in the morning to get
He
your
did.
coffee? Was that really the routine?
That was really the routine.
You would wake up, stay in bed, he'd bring you Starbucks.
Even when we were on vacation, he would go out and find coffee for me. And even if we were in a foreign country, you know, that was our routine. And he would come back and
Management.
I would get up and get dressed and drink coffee.
Is that every day or most days?
Most days, you know. He was a tea drinker, and so he drank Lapsang Susong. And Lapsang Susong is a strong smoky tea. And I love this about him. He drank that because he read a book by James Michener called Centennial. And in it, they talked about how the Scottish traders drank this smoky tea. And Dan was so interested in it, he went out and got some and tried it and liked it. Now, how can you not love a guy who has chosen a literary reference for his tea? You know,
Yeah, she thought it
we
was
were
cute,
a
but
team.
no, you weren't. Dan thought you were until you killed him.
In the morning that Dan died, you expected him to have a cup of his tea.
I did.
Told that to the police.
I did.
That was true.
Yes.
Carried it pretty much in the same cup.
Yes. We had a number of those cups. He could change them out.
I don't want to jump too far ahead, but the idea that somebody had maybe gone to Starbucks that morning, maybe not, I don't know. Do you recall back, did you have a Starbucks at any time that morning?
I did.
Just don't know how you got it.
It was part of my routine. That's all I can tell you. I don't remember it. I just know that it was part of my routine.
Could Dan have brought it to you?
At that point, no. He had live fire that day. He would never have stopped to do something like that when his day was already going to be as packed as it was.
Okay, so she's confident that Dan did not bring her the coffee, but yet at the same time, she doesn't know how she got the coffee. So if Dan didn't bring it to you, who else brought it to you?
You knew about that live fire.
I did.
We'll talk about that in just a little bit, okay?
Okay.
You testified that
And she's looking at the judge now.
you read an article regarding ghost guns or gun build kits,
The little eyes
and you found yourself
with
on the
the
website.
attorney.
searching around.
Mm-hmm.
What, I mean, you're saying you bought this gun kit as a research.
Mm-hmm.
When did that story start in your head?
It came together when I read that story. When I read that article in the paper about this guy, and all of a sudden I knew how I could twist it and make it into a story. You know, ideas come, out of the blue, and when they come sailing by, you write them down so you don't forget them, and then sometimes you act on them.
And that was November of
November,
2017
sometime in November
that
of 17.
you read the article,
Uh-huh.
started doing research.
Mm-hmm.
And you visited the Ghost Guns website several times without purchasing anything.
That's true.
And what were you searching for on the Ghost Guns website?
Research.
What were you looking for?
I was looking, keep in mind, I know nothing about guns at this point. I knew nothing about guns. And so what I was trying to do, if I'm going to write a story on building a gun, I got to learn a lot about guns in the time frame that I have. I cannot be the person who knows nothing and write a story any.
So this is all, it's about to wrap up in just 2 or 3 minutes. And I love how the prosecution attorney will jump from topic to topic to keep her on edge. This is what you'll see a lot of tomorrow as well. And it's funny because she's so adamant about how she was researching. It's for the research. I'm researching. It's for the research. It's for the writing. It's for the book. I'm researching. And in 2 seconds, she's going to say how she's not a researcher at all. And Dan's the researcher, and she's the impulsive one.
Would believe.
Okay. And were you doing other research online regarding Ghost Gun build kits?
Not that I remember. I was pretty happy with the Ghost Gun site, and I know there were other sites that did similar things, but the Ghost Gun site made it seem simpler than some of the others.
Okay. And you felt that it provided you some information on how the build would occur?
Yes.
Were there plans or anything on there?
What do you mean exactly? Plans? You mean like architectural plans, like plans that show like when you're putting IKEA furniture together plans?
I
They're
guess
their
so.
plans.
Not that I saw.
Um, and so I guess what you're saying is then when you decided to purchase one,
Uh-huh.
you just thought that it was going to be easier to build.
I leap into the water first. Yes.
Yeah, sure
Dan's our
do.
researcher in that regard.
You are a researcher, or you're not?
No, I said that backwards. I am a person who, once I have an idea, tends to leap forward. Dan, once he has an idea, tends to research it to death. And then the chickens are a perfect example of this. He would read to me at night from the romantic books called Chickens in Your Backyard or Chicken Tractors. But when we got chickens, Dan had a whole plan for how they were going to work.
The sarcasm in Nancy Brophy. He would read to me the romantic book. Like she really wanted a romantic book read to her, but instead she got the chicken book.
If I had thought, hey, chickens would be fun, we would have had a plan, build it as you go plan. He was just a planner, and I was not.
She was not a planner.
So were you researching for a book
Looking
or
at the
not?
attorney.
I'm sorry, did I go off target there? I was researching for a book, but I wasn't researching beyond here. Let me see if I can say this simpler than I'm doing it. I was researching for a book, but it didn't occur to me that putting the Ghost Gun together would be as complicated as it was. What occurred to me was, hey, here's this system I can use. And when, now that you mention it, when I got the Ghost Gun in this little case, there was instructions in there, I'm fairly sure. I'm not sure now that I've said that, sorry.
Had you finished your answer? All right,
And
we are now
here's
at 4:45, so let's break for today and resume again at 9 o'clock tomorrow.
and we're done for the day. And I love how the judge is like, okay, are you done with your answer? because she'll just go off on tangents. And we're going to get a lot of this, a lot more of this tomorrow in tomorrow's cross examination, which I think is closer to like 2.5 hours. So I may split it up because this one was 45 minutes and we see how long that took. But thank you guys so much for joining me for my commentary and my analysis of the Nancy Brophy cross examination, part one. I hope to continue doing videos like this and other true crime content because I am a true crime fanatic like the rest of us. So, thank you guys again, and I hope to connect again soon.